Hey, it's David here. I got a new camera. I think you can actually see my skin now. um, a couple of friends from the US sent me their cast-offs. So, yay, no more using my really cheap cell phone camera. So hopefully this will be a little bit better quality. I'm not sure about the lighting, but we'll see what happens. Go with the flow. But I thought I would talk about some parts of the creation process with the Time Speaker universe, because I've created it to be a lot of different things very deliberately. And one of the core sort of big themes that have been there the whole time is inclusivity. And as always with me, there's a bit of a story. You see, I started writing when I was 11, 12. And even at that age, I knew I had a very clear image of what I wanted my writing universe to be, what I wanted people to get out of my stories. And I had a lot of troubles at school and as a kid, because my biggest problem was there were all of these things I wanted to do, all of these clothes and shoes and activities and stuff that kids do when they're living, that I wanted to do, that I wasn't allowed to do because they thought I was a girl. My earliest memory is of mud. I used to love mud. I loved the feeling of mud. It was all squishy, and I actually like playing with clay artistically, but apparently girls weren't allowed mud. They weren't allowed to want to be in the mud. They weren't allowed to have gumboots. They weren't allowed to go outside in shorts and a t-shirt. They had instead to go out in a white frilly dress with little tiny petite shoes, that they were not allowed to get messy. So I remember that age, I think it was 5 or 6, really early on. And I remember sitting on the bed in my bedroom like this, in my knickers, in my underwear and a singlet, going no, because Dad wanted to put me in a frilly dress. And I was like, that's frilly and it's white, and I'm going to go immediately to that big puddle over there of mud. Why would I want to wear a white frilly dress? And they never listened. And so I've had that my whole life. And in particularly at school as well. I wasn't allowed to do this, I wasn't allowed to do that, I wasn't allowed to do this sport, I wasn't allowed to join the soccer team because it was the boys' team, ad nauseum. So I learned early on that people had certain expectations, and if you didn't meet those expectations, not only were you sort of punished or yelled at or whatever, you also ended up, well, I ended up getting treated worse because of it. And I remember feeling the injustice of it quite succinctly, and not wanting anyone else to have to deal with that. You know, it's not fair. So that was probably my first conscious experience of discrimination. I didn't know that it was called sexism or discrimination, but it was quite a big part of my childhood that I hated. That wasn't, direct abuse. Laughing at serious subjects, that's all you can really do. But in, I think it was Santa 4 or Form 1, so age 10, 11, I did this big project. They told you that the assignment was to find something, politically important or something in the news or whatever, and do lots of research and do a ginormous presentation about it. And I, by just random chance, at the time, so this is the late 80s, early 90s, I saw a news item on the AIDS epidemic. And the way the news projected it was like it was this unavoidable, unfixable problem, and poor those people, but we can't do anything to fix it. But when I did a lot of research, I realised that actually they could do lots to do. there were lots that they could do. There was lots that they could do to help. There were some treatments back then as well, not as effective as they are now, but people were just dying on the street, just dead. Because the society, is mainly the US, although we had similar attitudes here, they didn't care, because these people were gay people, and gay people weren't people. So I did this huge project, and I remember doing I don't know if it was a presentation or like a board, like with reports or pictures or whatever, but I remember doing the presentation of whatever variety it was, as if all of the adults around me and all the other kids didn't know. Like, oh my gosh, look at this thing I found out that all these evil people on the other side of the world are doing to people. We have to do something about it. And my teacher patted me on the head. That's nice, dear. And I remember thinking, what? How could anyone just let people die like that? I mean, and you can't just say I was just innocent. I mean, I still feel that way. And I'm 40. And a lot of people do. And the next experience of discrimination, or at least awareness of discrimination, was, I think it was a school trip. I'm not sure. It was quite early on, probably 12, 13-ish. And I went up to the Auckland War Memorial Museum. They were having this beautiful, what was it? I think, might have been up there because I wanted to see the mummy, because there's a permanent display of an actual Egyptian mummy. And I walked in on a special Holocaust memorial sort of, they had a whole section to do with the Holocaust. I mean, it was the War Memorial, so there is always something up there, but it was a big, big thing. And, God, thinking about it still makes me want to cry. I came across the story of Anne Frank. To do brief so I don't blubber, all of these stories, all of the pictures, everything, there were recordings, voice recordings, the news and stuff like that, and they showed, pictures of bodies, pits filled with bodies and all the horrible, horrible things. And when I came across Anne Frank, she looked like me. I mean, not completely, but she had the same nose and the same smile. All I could see was me. And I don't actually know if I did look like that, but in my young head, she was about the same age as me. She was a writer like me. She had the same kind of smile as me. And it just right through my brain. And I thought, there are people out there that would kill me if I was Jewish, or if I was gay, or if I was insert label. And this kid was just a kid. She was just a kid like me. A writer like me. And that was when I realised that we had to change the world. I know that sounds simple, and I know it's not that simple, but I decided that day to change the world, or to try, And that's when my stories started having lots of social justice and ideas in it, and parts of TSU are old. Really, the core creation happened, it started really early, and so there's little elements that I can't fix, because they're core themes, core stories, core myths in the universe. And one of the things I actually don't like is, I don't know how to say that without spoilers. There's an element of racism, deliberate racism in TSU. It's not like in our world where there's the one holy perfect race and everyone else sucks. It's actually that each race is perfect as it is, and that what's evil are the interbred races. I try to use the terms multinational, like because I want to avoid racist terms, because they trigger a lot of emotion and they get hurt, and I don't want to hurt people. I just want to sort of, shine a big light on it. But I had this idea that in the religion that's in, at least the on Planet Shadow, that's the big religion, Church of the Founder, that the founder, who's like a prophet, I guess, he's not quite sort of a Jesus-esque, he's more of a prophet, a living person talking for the divine, whatever word that is. Avatar, I don't know. No, Avatar is the divine in the person. Anyway, and one of his things, he set out a bunch of rules in the story, in the Church of the Founder story, and one of the rules was separate the nations. And a part of the sequence of this was actually to show how arbitrary religious statements are. Because in the story that the modern characters have in their Bibles, or whatever, the Book of Patron, or Book of Patrons, or whatever, Book of the Founder, because I've got multiple books, that it says in black and white, don't have babies from multiple nations, like don't breed two nations together. But that commandment came out of the Reformation, and the Reformation was a war. So there was an old system that the people in Iran, I get told, was called the Temple of the Founder. It was a completely different thing, and when they had the Reformation, they killed all of the priests of the old temple, or as many as they could find, and the Mern, unfortunately. Mern are gargoyle creatures. They're beautiful and lovely and kind and better than people. And then they rewrote the religion and the commandments of the teachings of the Founder into commandments, into a lot more sort of more like what we would recognize as a religion. And so the original thing that the original founder said was, hey, keep those two groups separate. It wasn't anyone who has sex between different nations is evil or anything like that. It was, hey, can you put that group over there and that group over there, and don't let them mix for now, right now, just for like until we sort everything out. And that's what he did. But through the Reformation, they transformed it. They rewrote it for their own agenda to genetically separate the nations. And then that got turned into hybridophobia. I haven't actually figured out what the good spelling for the word is. Which turns into, modern day in the story, racism. That anyone who's a hybrid is evil. At least to the fundies, the fundamentalists of the religion. Sorry, I make a joke. I call fundamentalist Christians or fundamentalist whoever's fundies, because it sounds funny, ha fundies. So it just takes a lot of the fear out of them, because the fundies are the people that want me dead because I'm trans or whatever. So it's, yeah. Anyway, and so I at sort of, I think it was age 15, 16, I tried to put this idea of racism based on religion and why it's dumb into the story to show the lesson, to show that religion isn't a justifiable way of saying, we get to hate these people because the Bible said, or whatever said. The book, the holy book that is perfect, said this thing, therefore we can kill these people. But it didn't come off as well as I wanted it to. It actually came off like, because I haven't written the stories of the Founder or the Reformation yet, so it's in the story because it's part of the creation that I started at when I was a teenager, but it didn't come off as well as I want to, but I can't fix it. Not until I've done the Reformation and Founder stories, and then you find out the context. And and it always, every time I see it, I flinch. I think, oh, that's done so badly, but I can't fix it. I've tried to change the words a little, instead of races, it's nations. I've tried to sort of just tone it down. But there's only so much you can do. But all the way from the beginning of my writing, I've tried to put in social justice-based things. Inclusivity. I want to include people in TSU who would otherwise not be included in society. As I don't think I did the racism thing very well, because it's not like our racism. Not particularly, anyway. But the other problem with inclusivity is, like, I made it, for example, without homophobia, I made it so that in Shadow TSU, Planet Shadow TSU, sexuality doesn't exist. Like, the word sexuality, gay, straight, bi, whatever, doesn't actually exist. I mean, asexual exists, but the other sexualities don't have words for it, because you just love the people you love. You have sex with the people you have sex with. There's no religious edict that says it's evil or anything. People just love who they love and get on with it. But the problem is, you can't, when you're that far through, when you create a world where that's normal, and not a big deal, there's then no words for it. Like, Jaola. Technically, she's bisexual, because her first partner's a dude and her second partner's a chick. Sorry, I forget, chick is an offensive word. A woman. Giselle is probably gay, because his first love is a dude and his next love is a dude. Well, sort of. But they don't have words like that. They don't describe their sexuality, because it doesn't matter. You only need to describe something when you need to understand and process and describe and justify, I guess, in the case of against homosexuality, homophobia. When people have that phobia, you have to understand your own situation and get the right words and the right labels to explain to them, to fight back against them, and then to normalize things. And so they never had that process. They didn't need to make words like homosexual or heterosexual or bisexual or whatever. And so you can't, the characters don't sit there and go, hi, I'm gay, or whatever. They don't do that because they don't have those words. And I did the same with being trans as well in the story. It's so much of a not big deal that the characters don't have words for it. Like, technically Hawk is probably what we would call trans, because his body is hermaphrodite, not male, but his gender is male. So it's not matching. But because I created a world where their species dealt with all of that bigotry like 10,000 years ago, 8 or 9,000 years ago, that they didn't, you're just who you are. There's no way to describe. Like, I actually had to specifically write, I think it's in Bargy Haven, I'm not sure, that Hawk's body was specifically of an androgen type, or, sorry, hermaphrodite type, shape. Because there was no other way to describe it. And now I've got no way to say, well, actually this character's technically trans and this character's technically trans. Because they come from a culture where sex and gender are almost completely separate. And no one talks about someone's sex. They don't care about someone's bits, because they don't have descriptions for sexuality either. So they don't even describe, hey, I like these bits, or neither of these bits, or whatever. And so, because I've tried to make a universe where there's no homophobia and no transphobia, or hasn't been for a very, very long time, they don't have any words to describe it, so they don't identify each other with these labels that we have. So they all know, for example, that Hawk has a hermaphrodite body and a male brain, or spirit, or heart, or whatever word you want to use. His gender is male and his sex is hermaphrodite. Everyone knows. They don't think about it. It's just, okay, that person's less bulky, so, if we want to have babies, we'll be able to have babies, whichever bits you've got. Because hermaphrodite means has both a uterus and a penis. So I've, in my effort to try and be as inclusive as I can, I've actually made more problems. I mean, it's worth it. I mean, I felt so good when I finally managed to figure out what to do about the androgen personal pronouns. I knew which characters were going to be androgen, except Renata, Nalana's Misha, uncle, aunt, Misha, whatever, Nalana's mother's brother, sibling. Because Ren was originally just a guy. He's still a guy in my head, but on paper, Ren is an androgen. And sex doesn't actually matter. See, I'm still misgendering that character. That's really annoying. But all the other characters who were androgen and couldn't be, got to be again. And even though it's really annoying to have the they, them, their personal pronouns from a writing perspective, I pretty much have to do they, them, their, and then replace the th with a z, because it doesn't come out naturally. But it's worth it. I was so excited when I finally got it to work, and I did a sequence of Chaos Gate, I think, with the new pronouns, and I'm just like, yes, victory, because I want to include people, and while it's not perfect, and there's going to be room issues in the future that I won't know that I'm doing wrong yet, it's part of the process. It's part of the process to try and include those things in the story. The other semi-difficult thing with me trying to be inclusive is actually the lack of sexism. Because in our culture, women are supposed to be beautiful. They wear pretty clothes, they wear shoes, they wear sexy things, low tops so they show off their tits. And I personally find it quite vile. I hated having to participate in that at any point when I was younger. But to write it into the story is to also confuse readers, because readers are wired, because they're in our culture, to think woman equals these things, this set of traits, this set of interests, and men are supposed to be this set of traits and this set of interests. And then, of course, because I was brought up in this particular society as well, how do you encapsulate the androgen mindset when we don't have one? We don't have particularly independent stereotypes or behavioural things or interests for an androgen. Because androgen is supposed to be a third sex, not actually like dude with a little chick. Sorry, guy with a little woman, or woman with a little guy. It's not actually supposed to be. It's also supposed to be non-binary, like separate from the two genders, our two genders. It's supposed to be its own third gender. But the only way I can imagine it in my head is as a mixture of male and female, when it's not meant to be. And then you've got clothes. Like, what do you wear as a woman if you're not being pretty? What do the clothes look like? And how do you present yourself gendered in a gendered way if it's not how we do it? It's quite a lot of mental gymnastics, and it's been really fun. I've created gendered clothing as in a place where the waist is. So if it's a high waist, like armpit or under the breast, it's female. The person is female. In the middle, it's androgen. Low, it's guys, men. But it runs into other problems, like the TSU, my official TSU artist, Heather Watson, she's a great mate. She was doing Usher, and twice she's given Usher a dress when Usher wouldn't be caught dead in a dress, because a dress in TSU is like a tiara. It's a sign of rank, not gender. And she's not interested in rank and pussyfooting around, and she's more interested in punching people in the face. Or just, wearing fatigues or whatever. But we're all wired to think girl equals dress, or girl equals girl. Because she's not a girl, she's a woman, She's not a kid. And so you get all these mental gymnastics, and I love it. I love being challenged. I love that discord in the brain. This is what I think, or this is what I've been told to think. This is what's really right. How do we shove those two bits together so they make sense? I love the mental gymnastics, but a lot of people find it really uncomfortable, and they get confused. Sometimes they get angry, and I can't really fix that. I had another person who really liked Nalana, and I love Nalana. She's one of my most favourite characters. I love being in her head. I love writing from her perspective, because she's all love and light and passion and joy and just wonderfulness. But this person kept putting her in dresses and in pretty things and in sexy things that show off what little cleavage she'd have. When the sexualization of female bodies, or women's bodies, is probably the better word, doesn't happen on their planet. They don't. The only people that get objectified are the sex workers, and they do that by choice. Society doesn't pressure them to do that. In fact, a sex worker could wear slumpy clothes and still advertise themselves as a sex worker, and it's not gendered. I imagine, theoretically, a sex worker is probably more statistically likely to be hermaphrodite, because then you've got both sets of gear for extra fun, whatever. But so no one gender is sexualized like it is in our world. But because I'm wired, because I grew up in this world, not that world, it's hard to describe stuff. It's hard to imagine what they'd be wearing. It's hard to... Who wears makeup? Who has long hair? What do suits look like? What would sexy man look like? What would women's clothes look like if they were not specifically designed to be beautiful or sexy? And I'm a writer. I'm not a designer. I'm not a clothes designer, a fashion designer. So these are questions I can't actually answer, but I know that they are questions that will come up. And they complicate the story, because how do I describe what they're wearing if I don't know? How do I describe the stereotypes, the gendered stereotypes, if theirs are different? If women aren't sexualized and beautiful, what are they? And I'm not saying that in a bad way. I'm not saying, we should only sexualize women and make them be beautiful and stuff. But if you think about, okay, what does being a woman mean? And all of the things that I can come up with that I was taught as a kid are things that are problematic. Like, obviously the first one is sex. We're trained from a young age that there's only two genders and they're two sexes, they're the same thing. And we know in the modern age that that's not the case. Sex and gender are actually quite different. They're related, obviously, but they're not the same thing. And so womanhood can't be just in the uterus, in that definition. Womanhood has to be bigger than just the uterus. And so what's the next word? And I think my brain immediately produces beautiful, sexy, graceful, artistic. You know, women's bodies are beautiful. You can make paintings out of them and they're just gorgeous. But that's because we're trained to view women's bodies as art, as beauty, as something nice to look at or touch or whatever. Our society objectifies women and women's bodies. So you take that beautiful and sexy away, because in an equal society, all genders and all sexes would be beautiful, or actually specifically sexy, depending who's viewing. But so what else is womanhood? And all the other things I can think of for womanhood is things in our culture. To me, a woman is strong because they're in a society that treats them like chattel, sexual chattel. And the women who survive, the women who fight back, the women who go, screw the stereotype, I'm being who I want to be. They're strong, they're warriors, And so, all of the things I can think of for womanhood have problematic aspects to them. They're not mutually exclusive. Like, obviously, many women, part of their identity is the uterus and their ability to have children and their version of motherhood. But that's not all that is womanhood. Same with beauty. You get the models and the young ones who are gorgeous and fabulous and actors and blah-de-blah. That's still femininity, because it's part of their femininity, but it's not all of femininity. There's more to being a woman than being pretty or being able to have children. Because if it wasn't more, all of the women that can't have babies wouldn't be called women. All the women that have to get their breasts off because of cancer or whatever wouldn't be women. Wouldn't be allowed by society to be women. So womanhood has to be bigger than your body. And it has to be bigger than what society says it is. So what is it? And I don't have an answer. I'm having enough trouble trying to find my masculinity in a world filled with hypermasculinity and toxic masculinity. Because I'm not interested in beefing up. I mean, it might be fun to try, but kind of like a beard. It'd be fun to try a beard, but I don't think I'm really a beard person. At least not yet. So I'm having enough trouble trying to find my masculinity within society's definition of masculinity, let alone something like womanhood, which I never understood to begin with, other than in the context of struggle and difficulty and objectification. And my point is, in my effort to try and be inclusive, to try and brush away, imagine a world, a universe, where these things that hurt me and other people don't exist. And it brings more problems, more difficulties, more philosophical and emotional challenges. I love the challenges. I love the intellectual exercise of trying to entertain things that I can't necessarily wrap my head around, as long as they're not hateful things. But I love trying to understand these things with my flawed upbringing, my flawed social programming. I love exploring what it might be in the future. But that also makes it problematic for writing, to write in that universe when if all of my readers were in that universe, it would be easy. But because me and my potential readers are in this universe, this world, with sexism and homophobia and transphobia and blah 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 blah, all the other phobias and isms, they still have to interpret the story through that lens. And however much fun I love to challenge that programming that I've learned when I was a child, a vast majority of people get quite a deep sort of mental dysphoria over being challenged, having those parts of their brain, parts of their knowledge challenged. And so I have to balance the story around the need for it to be inclusive so that everyone can be, or at least everyone who's been the victim of oppression to one degree or another is welcome and safe, and to imagine a world without most of those bigotries, but also have to be able to describe it in such a way in the books, in the story, so that people in our world can understand it, even if they don't have as much research and knowledge about social justice that I'm basing my stuff on. Every day I'm learning new things in social justice. I do occasionally have breaks because some of the transphobia lately has been quite disturbing. So there's all of these balances, and you have to... It's so hard to create a universe that's ideal in particular areas when you don't have that ideal state in your world. But the whole point is to create a world where people exist as they are, as they're allowed to be. There's a girly girl. Nalana is probably as girly as you can get. And she, being technically a lady, she will be wearing dresses and being beautiful. Although not objectified. But we've also got Asha and Eagle, and Jaola. They're all different versions of womanhood that also kick ass. You do not want to piss off Asha. She will own you. She will kick you in your ass, and you'll be squished, you'll be mushed on the concrete going, ow. And so I've tried to put different kinds of femininity and masculinity and blurry bits, blurry gender in the story so that someone will be able to see something that they like, something that resonates with them. I think the most hyper-masculine character we've got in TSU is probably Nama, and he still cries. He still mourns and wails. He still also, baffs people upside the head and tells them they're silly and picks them up by the scruff and puts them in places. So he does the manly thing quite well as well, but like the hyper-masculine thing, But you've also got, other characters who are less sort of muscly and grunty and, rugby player type person. And I should addendum this. I'm not actually saying any kind of expression of gender is bad, unless it's hurting other people. If your masculinity demands that you hurt other people, particularly if you sexually assault people, then that's bad. Sorry, it's just bad. Rapists? No, that's not what being a man is. But in general, I imagine a world where people can just be who they are, and society doesn't tell them who they're allowed to be because of things like genitals or names or class or race or anything. They can just... I hope one day that people will be in TSU, reading TSU, watching movies or TV series or whatever set in TSU, and they can see that in that world they can be whoever and whatever they are. They can like sex or not like sex. They can like gender or not like gender, or have bits of gender or whatever. As long as everyone's consenting adults, people can be who they are without being told they can't because they don't have the requisite things. That's my vision. I want people to see TSU as the safe place, a place where they can be who they are, within reason. I still haven't figured out how to do disability, physical disability, because, I'm sorry, but the agency is an asshole. If you cannot work, if you cannot fight, they kill you. It's awful, but that's what fascists do. And the agency is specifically and only focused on patriotism and service to the country, and someone who can't fight or work, they're generally not considered to be, well, they're generally retired. And unless they're high rank or from high rank families, if you're below A1 rank, they kill you. You're just killed. And it's horrible and it's wrong. But that's the mindset. That's what fascists do. You cannot further my agenda, so therefore you have to die. And I haven't quite figured out how to bring different kinds of disability into the rebels. I've already put in the canon that it's common for rebels to learn once they come out of the agency, possibly even in the agency, how to do sign language and all that sort of stuff. But I tried to make a character who was disabled, like a paraplegic, and all I ended up doing was fixing the problem. You know, Tolan, who's Amana, who's awesome, Amana's little brother, was supposed to be a paraplegic, but Tolan, it got fixed because Tolan is a high-rated kinetic, so he can just move his body without his muscles being needed to use, and that's not how you do it. And in my defense, I created the character as he is about 20 years ago. I didn't know anything about ableism and how to express it and how to include it into stories, and I'm still learning. Ableism's really complicated and quite difficult. And in New Zealand, and certainly in my family, I was programmed from a very early age that disability was bad. Being of low intelligence was bad. And I'm trying to unwind that, but it's not going as easy as the other ones. It's hard to rewire your brain. But I'm trying, and I'm hoping once I've got the idea, I can write maybe a chapbook or I don't know, another side book at some point where we're talking about a character with certain physical disabilities or whatever in a way that's empowering for people in the flesh world. But I don't want to do it and screw it up again. I want to do the research and find out what's the best way to do representation for people with mobility-based disabilities. Because when I couldn't walk, when I was walking around with a walking frame or in a mobility scooter, all I desperately wanted was to be fixed. And so that's how I projected into the story any person with disabilities. But that doesn't work. That's not true representation. That's just, let's take a minority and fix their problem so they're no longer a minority. It's not inclusion. But I relish the challenge of learning. I love to learn, and the one thing I miss about university was I learned something new every single day. Also, in my defence, it's really hard to find decent resources on ableism, or abled, or I don't know what the proper term is, but inclusion in writing for people with different kinds of disabilities. Mental health and neurodiversity I can do because I have some experience, but I don't know what the empowering perspective is of physical mobility issues. So I'll get there, but I'm trying, and I'm looking forward to the day when I can write a story with a character who's totally kick-ass, or at least just happy and empowered and still living their life. Anyway, I have to go. My computer's running out of space. But But hopefully that wasn't too much of a ramble. So, bye-bye. Ara ni tata.